ProCognita, Get Agile podcast. Stakeholder Value. Interview with Tom Gilb. Welcome to Get Agile podcast. I'm Tomasz Wykowski from ProCognita, and today with me is a special guest, Tom Gilb, from Norway right now, originally from the US. The one thing I know about Tom is any question I ask him, he has already an article about this one. So it's super hard to choose a topic for us, but we decide to focus on the customer value. So Tom, first of all, welcome. And second of all, what is the customer value from your perspective?
Okay. So when people use the usual phrases about being customer-centered and user-centered, I push back a little bit because I believe that it needs to be what I call stakeholder value. Now that includes all kinds of customers and prospective customers and users, but it includes a lot of other people and organizations and laws like the European GDPR privacy law. And the point about stakeholders is they have requirements for your system. They are instead of calling them stakeholders, I prefer to call them requirement sources. But if you only focus on customers and users, you will get a small subset of critical requirements and you risk your projects failing. Or if you analyze failed projects, I'll bet you find a stakeholder not well analyzed and requirements that are missing. So stakeholder values is my preference.
All right, so I'm going to turn a little around. So one of the challenge I see with some of the organizations is that they try to satisfy every single stakeholder. So they create a list of people in the organization and they try to deliver value for everyone. And basically, this is also a failure mode,
of course.
Mostly.
So that's why I use the word critical. Critical stakeholders, meaning if you ignore them, you are very high risk of total failure of project. And then critical stakeholders have, by definition, critical requirements. A requirement that if you don't do it, you risk your system is illegal in European Union or something like that. So that's one. That's the beginning of what I call prioritization. It's a very big subject for me. It's very dynamic and rich prioritization. But the critical stakeholders, first prioritization, critical requirements from the critical stakeholders. One stakeholder can have many requirements, is a possibility. And one requirement can be shared by many stakeholders, but maybe little different degrees. And then we move into a phase where even this selection, I talk often of top 10 critical values and requirements to focus on. This is just the beginning of focus. When you have achieved your top 10 critical values, maybe in a quarter of a year, then you can shift your focus to the next top 10. But you focus and achieve. And this is a necessary part of what I call agile as it should be, not agile as it unfortunately is in many places.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that soon, but before that, you say critical stakeholders. So how do I distinguish between the critical stakeholders and very important stakeholders?
Okay, well, the critical means life and death. It's like critical body functions are those you live and die with medically. So you can say, could this stakeholder kill my project, like declare it to be illegal? Yes, they could. Okay, so they are a critical stakeholder. They have the power. Okay, so they have the. Could this stakeholder tell everybody not to buy my product, and they wouldn't buy my product? Then they have the power to destroy your efforts. So it's about power and a theoretical potential to kill your effort or project. And then the same thing applies. It's really the requirements we're looking at. If this requirement is not fulfilled or not fulfilled well enough, it's secure but not secure enough. Could a slightly insecure system be taken over by a hacker and destroy my business? Yes, well, that's a critical requirement, that security. Okay, and critical stakeholder is maybe what we call an antagonistic stakeholder, which would be a hacker. Not all stakeholders are positive, like customers and users. Some of them are actually your enemy or hackers or a competitor or somebody like that.
Oh, cool. Good examples. Again, I'm going to dig one more time into this one. The moment we're going to start talking about the critical stakeholders, in many organizations, you will learn soon that everybody is critical. So how do you help the organization to decide which is critical? It's like any good law of the thumb?
Again, there's this, you ask yourself or your colleagues the question that I mentioned before. Could these kill us, shut us down, destroy our profitability or something like that? Yes or no? And usually the answer is fairly obvious. A legal power can make your system illegal. A hacker can absolutely shut down your entire industry. And so the answer is they have the power, the theoretical potential of killing your project or product. That is fairly obvious, and every group can make a list of all those who have that power. And maybe you have a list of 30. And if you're following my rules of don't prioritize more than 10 things at once, then you have to draw a line and say, okay, but what are the most dangerous, the most immediate, the most destructive 10? And my experience is people can draw a line, say, okay, these are probably the 10 most dangerous and the others are dangerous, but we'll have to do them later. We can't, if you try to do too many things at once, as you're indicating, maybe you get nothing done. So you have to, I find people are pretty good at focusing on the critical. And by the way, it's not like you're never going to do the other ones. As I said, in my real life customer examples, my customer spends maybe a quarter of a year on top 10 and they achieve them. Then they go to the next top 10. So maybe within a year, you're doing 40 critical stakeholders. But you get the very most critical ones done very early, like in the first quarter of a year. That's good Agile, is delivering most critical things most early.
All right. So you said this should be obvious for you. So are there any stories about not so obvious critical stakeholders? So do you have any story like about discovering the stakeholder in the middle of the work?
Now, part of this obvious is history. That is, you can look around you at your own projects when they have failed or had problems. I mean, an organization should be learning from their own history. And then you can learn from competitors' history or similar businesses. You can look things up on the internet and look at threats which have not hit you, but they're hitting everybody else. Maybe you've not been hacked, but we know a lot of people get hacked. So there's now no matter what you try to learn and how thorough you are, there's always the one that you forgot, and you can't cover that immediately. And so take the COVID crisis. How many people saw that coming, really, except Bill Gates, who predicted it 2015. But so sometimes you just have to react quickly to the knowledge that one of our computers got hit and we have 1,000 more, so we have to shut them all down. That kind of reaction. So in other words, react very quickly is another possibility.
All right. So you mentioned 10 critical. Why is 10 the right number?
Sometimes I answer that question by just saying it's not too small a number like 1, and it's not too big a number like 100. Okay, so I'm not fanatic about 10. If somebody says we have 12, go ahead, But if they say we only have 1, I say I don't believe you. You're not thinking deeply. You have a few more, and then they start thinking about it, and suddenly, my experience is they always get to 10 and they exceed 10 quite easily. They say, okay, that's enough. Let's deal with the first 10 and not overwhelm ourselves with analysis paralysis of too many things and all that.
All right. So in lean startup world, there's this concept of the North Star, the only metrics that matters. So this sounds like a one ultimate goal as compared to 10. And you say, okay, even if we work with the small companies, there will be more than 10. So I don't know if you can relate to this one.
Well, no. Well, my experience is that these 10 are are distinctly different from each other, as different as, say, usability and security and flexibility. And there is no easy way to conglomerate them and deal with them. You have to deal with security by security strategies and usability with usability strategies. So I think the only realistic thing is to deal with several simultaneously. And I know that's more difficult than only one. But if you really need to do one, what we do is we divide our Agile project into, say, weekly or perhaps 2% of budget increments. And in any one increment, then you can deal with one, and we often do. Okay? So if you think you have 10 weeks ahead of you and you have 10 increments, then you could deal with each one of these, taking the most critical one first and trying to crack it. And maybe you don't quite crack it, but you start on number 2 in the second week and you continue working on number 1 until you crack it and deliver it. So I think people who think of only one, they are not well equipped with good tools for dealing with multiple things simultaneously. Now, I have a lot of tools for dealing with 10 or 100 things simultaneously, such as my impact estimation table and my other language devices. So it doesn't scare me to deal with many simultaneously, but many people have no good tools for dealing with many things simultaneously. Therefore, it's very tempting to get down to the mental level rather than the written tables of sets of things level.
And we can share some of the links later on.
I think we will pick a nice free book digitally for everybody to get into these. For example, value requirements or something like that.
Cool. So what you're saying, even if I'm a startup and what I'm often hearing is focus on one thing, and you're saying, okay, if you focus on one thing, then most likely you're missing something.
Yeah, because reality of every business and every project is there are always multiple things that need to be considered within the coming year. And maybe one of those needs to be, if possible, considered in the coming week or month. But there's no such thing as in my real life, and I've been doing this. I've been consulting since 1960. Okay, so in my real life, I don't ever see the one. It's you can ask for one and you'll get one, but you start nudging a little bit. Isn't there anything else that's really important? It will arrive. People have multiple. It's been studied many times that no business has anything simple like one objective. Like profitability, it's always multiple objectives simultaneously. And that's just the nature of these beasts we call organizations and products and markets. They're complex and they have many dimensions at the same time.
Okay, so you mentioned being the consultant from the 1960s. I'm going to add right now that you're going to be 80 years old consultant, active consultant.
I'm still a young man in my 70s for the next few days.
Yeah, I remember you coming to Warsaw with just a small backpack, so I do remember this one. And we hope to have this published on your birthday, so maybe people can sing the happy birthday during watching this video. Okay, coming back to those 10 metrics. So what you're saying is basically we prioritize based on not on the features but on the metrics. We prioritize on those key elements of the system, right?
Yeah. So one of my other theories is that all projects are there to deliver stakeholder values, and I cannot think of any project, even in my imagination, and certainly not in my reality, which is not trying to deliver some value ideas to some stakeholders. This is the core reason for any project. If you say, why is this project here? It's about some form of value delivery. Now remember what value is. It's a subjective idea of what the stakeholders want. And a lot of the values are what we call qualities, security, flexibility, user friendliness, this kind of thing. But if you look at any project and ask the people paying for it, why are you paying for it? What's it doing here? You're going to get an answer like, well, we need to beef up the security. Or we need to get rid of the technical debt and make it more maintainable, or something like that. But it always boils down to values, and it's not about functionality. The functionality is usually already there in the existing or older systems. So we often spend a lot of time recreating the functionality because it maybe has to be programmed on a new computer, but it's already there. And if we could somehow avoid recreating the functionality that's already there and just focus on, say, the enhanced security, we would do that, and sometimes we do. Okay, so theory one: all projects are based on trying to improve values and qualities to make them better in the future. Now, number two, values are always quantitative or discrete in their nature. They're not black and white or binary. You don't have secure or not secure. You don't have user-friendly or not user-friendly. So now, once you know this, it turns out that the game is usually to move from some level of security you have today to a higher level, which would be more satisfactory tomorrow. Now, you must absolutely quantify all these values. Every value, every quality can always be quantified. If you don't know how to do it, I have a simple suggestion. Google it, and you'll find usually 300 million case studies of how to quantify security, user-friendliness. Use the word metrics after your keyword, like IT security metrics. And you'll find that everything you can imagine, somebody has already shown how to quantify it, and they've published it. That's how easy it is. Many people are in denial, say, oh, this is soft, and we don't know how to do it, and we never did it before. A lot of denial. But this is just silly. Absolutely every value, absolutely every quality can be articulated quantitatively. That means you can define a scale of measure, and you can define 2 points on the scale of measure: where you are now, the benchmark, and where you want to go in the future. Let's call it the goal for the moment. Okay, and now this gives clarity of purpose, and it permits people to agree. If you just say we want better security, everybody agrees. If you say we want to go from 10% chance of stopping the hackers to 99.9% chance of stopping them within 1 picosecond, people may say, oh my God, what will that cost? Is it technically possible? Okay, so it's amazing the power of a clear number in understanding what technical strategies need to be done, what it will really cost, when it can be delivered, and things like that. So I have as an absolute requirement that absolutely all the critical values will have a scale of measure, or sometimes, if it's more complex, a set of scales of measure. Things like technical debt, we find in practice, have about 10 things. Some of them, like how fast you find the bug, how fast you cure it, and how fast you test it, to give some idea of the multidimensionality of a technical debt problem. But the point is, we have defined a scale of measure, which kilometers per hour or bits per second, and we put 2 numbers on them, and the numbers are the degree of improvement. In other words, from here to there. And we also have usually a date, a deadline for when we need to deliver that level of security, that level of user friendliness, etc. And this makes everything so much clearer than most people have. Most people have nice sounding words. Take a look at any user story, just for example, and you have lots of ambiguous, nice sounding words, and you have designs mixed into the so-called requirement. It's a really messy idea. And I say, no. The only requirements that really, really count are the value requirements. They must be quantified. They can be quantified. And if you don't know how, we're going to give you a free book called Value Requirements on how to do it.
I already told our audience that there's a book or the article wrote by Tom, but not everybody knows that you were able to also measure love. So can you just give us a little bit more about this one, because I love that story.
Sure. Well, the short version is I've done a TED Talk on this. So if you Google Tom Gilb TEDx, you'll get the 17-minute TED Talk. But there were some Philips engineers in Holland who, when I said, you can quantify everything, they said, no, there are some soft things, Tom, you can't do it. And I said, you tell me what you can't do. And they said, love. I said, what kind of Philips products are you building? First question. Second question was, I'll teach you in 6 minutes how to do it. And the story of exactly how I taught them to quantify love is in the TED Talk. Look it up, have fun. We'll give the link to it for safety's sake, but you can easily Google it.
All right. One thing I noticed, talking about the metrics, one thing I noticed is that people often start with what they can easily measure instead of what is important. So can you relate to this one as well?
Of course. Yeah, people are forever quantifying things like money and time and profit, and then they avoid quantifying things that they have not pre-learned, like we've learned to do volts and bits and things like that, But there are very many values that people did not learn at school. It's not easily found in a textbook, but it's always found on the internet. Okay, and we did not learn the most precious skill of all that I try to teach people: how to quantify anything, even though you have never quantified it before. And in the old days, we didn't have the internet, so I had to learn to do it manually. Okay, so there's a manual process, and I'll give you some quick idea of that. But today, you can just look it up on the internet. The answer is always there. Now, the manual process is very simple. I call it Cartesian analysis. Okay, so this is the trick to defining love or technical debt. You say, what are the components of this? What are the various aspects of love? The aspects of technical debt. And once you get a list of that, what you're decomposing it into more specific things. And it turns out there's a law, which I found in an engineering textbook. If you keep on decomposing things, you will reach a level where quantification is obvious. It hits you in the face. You can't avoid understanding how to quantify it. So the one big trick in manual decomposition is decompose what is maybe a complex thing consisting of many things. Therefore, it seems to be difficult to have one quantification. But the moment you realize it is many things and they're very different, and you quantify all 5 or all 10, and then you say, this thing called love is the set. By the way, at the end of the TED Talk, we learned the hard way that in Corinthians, in the Bible, the agape, the Greek word for love, is exactly this. It is shown that you can decompose it, where the first level of decomposition is something like, I don't see my lover very often, or something like that, And but there are other aspects of love than how often you see your lover, this kind of thing. So, in other words, the idea of decomposition to reduce things to clearly measurable ideas is as old as Corinthians in the Bible, and probably much older than that. But that's the simple version.
Yeah. So when I'm listening to what you're saying, it's for me there is a strong correlation between evil approach and the ideas behind OKRs. So do you correlate those two items? Do you see the
now in the book we're going to give everybody value requirements. There is a section on OKRs, objectives and key results, or key requirements maybe, but key results. Now, I think OKRs are good for simple purposes like projecting your own personal work 3 weeks ahead. No problem. And that's what they were designed for. But I believe that as they're designed and taught and practiced, they are inadequate for systems like the National Health System of Poland or something like that. Completely inadequate. And I have a list of 10 things wrong with OKR. And I have some better methods. They're built into my planning language. And so I give a direct comparison and I give detail. And anybody, intelligent person, can make up their own mind about what is actually more powerful. So let me simplify. OKRs better than nice sounding words because they're trying to quantify, right? but they are not built heavy duty for large and complex systems. And there are certain things you need to be able to do, and I have listed them and detailed them, and will give everybody free information on it. So I hope if you're doing a serious project, you will choose the language, which is part of EVO, my Agile method, and quantify using scales of measure and scale parameters and lots of other good heavy-duty tricks.
Right. So I'm gonna close with one more question. As ProCognita, we are celebrating a 10 years anniversary, and mostly I usually ask the question about the changes in the software development or the product development over the last 10 years. Although I'm not sure in this case I should ask about the last 50 years most likely, or the 60 years. So you choose how do you see the customer value evolve over the last 10 years or 60 years, and are we getting better into that one?
I analyze this to a degree in the value requirements book, many different technologies and people like different IT architecture technologies and things like that. And long story short, everybody talks about value. Everybody acknowledges that, but and then I take a look, have they quantified it? Have they clarified it? Do they have any example of doing anything except bullshit words? And the answer is no. So we've in the last 10 years, we are talking more about it, but we're not doing anything seriously about it. So the project failure rate is just approximately as terrible and bad as it ever has been. Whether it's 30% or 50% total failure and another 30-40% challenged, it still is horrendous, especially in IT, but in fact in other disciplines. So we have made no real progress in getting control of delivering value because we've not taken values seriously at all. And that begins with quantification and measurement of all critical values. And it begins with EVO, it begins with agile step-by-step delivery of measured values and getting feedback and learning. Okay, not of delivering code, but of delivering value. And that little difference, most people still haven't got their mind around it.
So is there any hope for the software development world?
Is there any hope?
Yeah. If we haven't changed anything for the last 60 years, so...
Well, no. No, really. There will come a point where it will be illegal to have the bad practices we have. Insurance companies will not insure our projects if we don't do them. So, in other words, voluntary change is obviously not the answer because programmers happily program and get paid for failed projects, and then they get paid to do it all over again. So programmers are not going to save the world. Even the managers are just as bad as the programmers in understanding that there comes a point where you have to dictate good practices. As is true in medicine, in law, in engineering, we dictate by law good practices, and we don't leave it to the carpenters of the world to figure out what a good practice is. So we are not capable of governing ourselves, is all history. So I think we will gradually get to the point where people will. I'm actually working with one of the largest organizations worldwide for doing good things. I won't mention them, and we're starting to plug in better Agile and my practices. So, so we will spread the practices, but actually the chief technical officer has to wake up and dictate that my organization is going to do things properly, and values will be quantified. Otherwise, we don't know what we're spending money on, and we're tired of wasting money on our projects. Okay, and we're not there yet. We're not even near it.
So we're looking for the standard engineering practices for the software development.
Of course, everything I do is engineering practice, and but we have a lot of people running around with their craft of programming, and they're trying to build 500-story skyscrapers with their woodcraft. and it's not going to work. It's going to fall down, and it does all the time. Changing the whole culture is going to be long and hard, but individuals who want to change their project can do, and we've been doing that for decades. So there's plenty of real examples of people who, like the whole of Intel and Hewlett Packard and other organizations, have used my methods deeply for years and succeeded. But most people don't even know that. Okay, so individuals can choose that their project will be better and begin the change. But the overall recognition, we're still playing around with things like Scrum for 20 years, which is going nowhere and doing nothing with these things.
So there is a hope in this case.
There is hope. There's a saying, who said it? I think Gandhi or somebody like that. Be the change you want to see. So anybody listening who says, I want my project to succeed, I will learn and practice good methods, they probably have the power to do that. They don't need permission from their chief technical officer to succeed in a project using clear value objectives.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom, for this conversation. I really enjoy it and hope to see you finally in person.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I like to come to Poland, as you know. So I'll be there.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.